Hi guys, welcome back to INFJ. Today we are going to talk about our INFJ's good listeners. Before we get started, comment, like, and subscribe, and let's do this. So on the surface, it might seem like, of course, INFJs are the ultimate therapist personality type, probably up there with INFPs. This is probably what we're naturally good at. We are naturally all about deeper meanings. Our extroverted feeling cares about the human experience. INFJs must just be fabulous listeners. However, that's not exactly my experience with myself or all the time necessarily with other INFJs. What does this mean? Let's get into it. So, right off the bat, the INFJ, we do have the introverted intuition and the extroverted feeling for maybe just basic listening skills that maybe not every other personality type is as inept at, but probably any personality type could turn into something like a therapist or a life coach. I mean, I don't think it's really personality specific. But yes, INFJs have some basic tools that could give us maybe a leg up, maybe not a leg up over another personality type, but just help us out. So, INFJs use extroverted feeling. Extroverted feeling is all about commiseration. Extroverted feeling makes connections between how people feel and how we feel in relationship to one another. So how we connect with other people, how can we relate to each other is what extroverted feeling I feel like always asks. So I made some Game of Thrones videos and I said this is INFJ extroverted feeling. Part of why I feel like those video rambles were good examples of INFJ extroverted feeling is because extroverted feeling loves testimony. In Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, each character comes with a show-specific history, like a history of their family, a history of the actual events in their life, and with their own life history. Each character in Game of Thrones and House of the Dragons there's so much personality given to them, right? Each character we often see connecting their experiences or not connecting their experiences to the world around them. If you think of like the juxtaposition of Cersei and Daenerys, Daenerys always finds commonality with people, and Cersei seems to sever any attempt for there to be like a warm connection with someone else. I think in the first episode, she tells someone that she can only love her children because that's the only thing that's safe, right? So we see like connecting and relating to people who are different from us is very central to just the setup of Game of Thrones, which makes it a good video to talk about as an example of extroverted feeling. In my relationships with other INFJs, there were many times that I found myself to be the talker. So I felt like with a lot of my relationships with INFJs, I was often the talker. And with a lot of my relationships with INFPs, I felt like I found myself to be the listener. I don't think it's necessarily personality type specific, but there's some lenses that we could view it through. INFJs, I think we have a capacity to do both. I think we have a capacity to be public speakers, and I think we have a capacity to be listeners. Drawing connections between life experiences can be scary for some people. So INFJs being good listeners or being good talkers, good at sharing our experience, I should say. INFJs being good at listening to other experiences or sharing our experiences with others can be part of why the INFJ can be so misunderstood. In a relationship, if the other person is always sharing their experiences and you as the INFJ are always listening, in like a unfavorable dynamic, this could look like the other person might view the INFJ as the listener, maybe like almost in like a subservient way. Like someone might view an INFJ as like, okay, you listen to my stories, right? So this could definitely be a possibility that like an INFJ could experience. And so in that case, the person is putting themselves above the INFJ. And then when the INFJ starts sharing their stories, the INFJ thinks they are being reciprocal or creating some mutuality, or the INFJ could have like a bad intention. I don't know. But anyway, that you try to balance that and start sharing your stories with that person who always shares their stories. And now they see it, what I perceive in my limited perception, as like an affront to their power, which the INFJ does not see it that way really at all. And so that can be where people misunderstand us, because because they feel that doesn't make them feel good. So they're going to say, okay, like, you're not who I thought you were. You're not always going to listen to my stories. You're going to try to balance this out. Therefore, I don't understand you. I don't understand this. And they can get upset with us. They could not want to be in that relationship anymore. So, yes. So the INFJ very much views this as the commiseration. And our low extroverted sensing means not always. Sometimes we don't always perceive that this person is really just viewing the INFJ this as like their person who's always going to listen to them, as like some sort of subservient like listener. So that is something that's very important to consider, right? Because INFJs were like, well, where did I go wrong? Well, we didn't really, but every situation is unique. So yes, if someone has categorized themselves as someone not like you, so if you're an INFJ with low extroverted sensing, you're not putting out all this force. You are not necessarily climbing like all these social ladders in the same manner that those people are. And so because you're not putting out that force, people might see you as lower than them. And then they might see them as, then they disassociate. Even though they are creating a bond with you, they are disassociating themselves because they are putting themselves above you as like the INFJ listener, I guess, in this case. And so, yes. And so now you giving 50% back to them, you are showing them, okay, well, like, I do think I should be allowed to give, to share in this relationship. And now that they don't like that, right? And so I know I just explained that like two different ways, but basically, yes. So you're putting yourself on the same ground as them, and now this is upsetting them, right? But INFJs, so that is one way. INFJ listening and sharing can lead to being misunderstood. INFJs also, another component to INFJ listening and sharing our advice or sharing our experiences. So like if I'm an INFJ, if I'm listening to someone, I might connect with it. I might say, okay, I've been through the same thing. Or the extroverted feeling might give advice. Now, giving advice has been I don't know what the current thing is on advice, but like giving advice has become such a fraught area in like the world of MBTI and cognitive functions, because there's a lot of philosophies. It's like unsolicited advice is like abusive. That is something that I've seen tossed around. Right? It can be very subjective. Sometimes people don't know whether or not they want advice. Sometimes it's not until after someone gets advice and then they've digested it that they then decide that all along they didn't, right? There's so many ways to interpret advice or receive advice. And is the person giving advice have your best interest? There's all of these components. But advice has become like such a very fraught space. When you give advice, or my perception of it, you value someone, you think they're your friend, so their advice to you, you of course take with a grain of salt, but there's like a general trust for your relationship with that person. And so, one time one of my friends, and I'm not knocking, anybody, I don't think I'm always the best listener or advice giver. So one of my friends once was like giving me the vibe that I was like a bad listener, or like, and was like, kind of like overtly saying I was giving them bad advice, right? And so like a month later, I was talking with my friend, another friend who was an ENFP, um, and we were talking and we were having a really good conversation. And I was like, I'm just really trying to be a good listener. And my friend said, well, I know you're listening to me because you, like, you confirmed, or not confirmed, like you validated what I said and you gave opinion, right? And so, like, to one person, advice or unsolicited advice can be something they don't want. To another person, advice could be that could give them a feeling of, wow, someone is finally noticing me, someone is finally acknowledging what I'm saying, and someone's finally connecting with me, right? And so there's a lot of ways that people could take your advice, and then you add into that the intention of the person giving the advice. Like this is just like a sea of possibilities, really, for how this could be perceived. So, right, it's important. It's very much the dilemma of, do they want to talk about it? Do they want advice on it? So introverted, and so my friend who said this was like an ENFP, who said like, well, I feel validated when you give opinion, right? So that's like an experience I had, and I've had that with other ENFPs. They don't believe my advice. Like they don't. It's not gospel, but they they felt like someone was listening to them, right? Years ago in the MBTI community, there was a lot from introverted feelers, FPs, which I do like. How do I say this? Knowing that I don't have the same philosophies as FPs, I do acknowledge they're prevalent in MBTI, and they are prevalent in like the fields of like therapy and self-development. So when I state an FP view, I don't really agree or disagree. I understand that this view is good for certain people, but introverted feelers on the MBTI chat rooms, I would often see saying things like that they may or may not want to talk about this, and they're going to deal with it themselves, right? And so, my experience in real life is FI users take my advice with a grain of salt, and they like that they're talking through something with someone. In the MBTI community, it's this thing of, I might sort it out myself, and I may or may not want to talk about this. And I compare this to like TPs. TP types seem to be very much the stance of, wow, someone is kind enough to notice that I wanted to talk about this and is initiating talking about it with me and is connecting with me on this subject. So you see, I'm giving these examples that to show like all of the possibilities of what can happen when you actually are listening or when you actually give advice. Wow, this listening video has turned into an advice video. So are INFJs good listeners if all I'm talking about is me giving advice? I don't know. So then we talk about the other TP reaction that I've seen, right? Because TPs have low extroverted feelings, so they appreciate you commiserating with them. The other thing I've seen is TPs not liking the good feelingness of FE advice, the good feelingness of an FE lecture, or they might doubt its actual use and implementation.